Okay, let's unpack this. When we think of ancient family trees, particularly in a historical context like the Bible, our minds typically go straight to the men in the lineage. But what if some of the most pivotal figures, the ones who truly shaped the future, were women, often in the most unexpected and even, well, scandalous circumstances? What if these women, sometimes described as weak vessels, were the very vehicles God chose to bring his ultimate Redeemer, Jesus Christ, to defeat evil?
That's a fascinating question, and it's really at the heart of our deep dive today. We're going to explore the extraordinary women explicitly named in the genealogy of Jesus Christ, particularly in Matthew's Gospel. We'll uncover who they were, why their inclusion is so remarkable, and what profound insights their stories offer about God's, well, surprising redemptive plan.
Right, our mission is to truly grasp how these women, whose pasts were often marked by significant challenges or unconventional circumstances, weren't disqualified. Instead, their lives became powerful illustrations of divine grace. And this isn't just ancient history. It's an incredible encouragement, I think, for everyone, regardless of their background or past. It shows that God works through precisely whom he chooses for his grand purposes.
Absolutely, and to do that, our primary sources for this deep dive are the Gospel of Matthew, specifically chapter 1, and then key Old Testament books like Genesis, Joshua, Ruth, and 2 Samuel. These recount the often compelling stories of these women. Now, to really understand the profound significance of these women, we actually have to go back, way back to the beginning, to Genesis 3:15. This verse, sometimes called the Proto-Evangelium, which is, a fancy term for the first gospel or the initial promise of salvation, it lays out a foundational prophecy. It says, "And I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your seed and her seed. He shall bruise your head, and you shall bruise his heel." What's truly striking here, especially in a society where lineage was almost always traced through the male, is that unique phrase, her seed.
That is quite a departure from the norm, isn't it? From the very outset, God seems to be hinting at something supernatural, something that completely bypasses conventional patriarchal tracing. It implies a divine intervention through a woman, really setting the stage for everything that follows.
Exactly. It's a clear signal of God's initiative in salvation, and it underscores the critical role women would play in his unfolding redemptive narrative. It's an unusual phrase that powerfully points forward, many believe, to the virgin birth of the Messiah.
Okay, so with that astonishing prophecy as our foundation, how does that promise, laid out way back in Genesis, then manifest in the family tree we see in Matthew's Gospel, Matthew 1, verses 1 through 17? Because, like you said, it's widely known that Jewish genealogies were almost exclusively patrilineal. Yet Matthew explicitly names 5 specific women in Jesus' lineage. That in itself feels really intentional.
Oh, it absolutely is. Matthew's decision to break with tradition and include these particular Old Testament women alongside Mary is a powerful theological statement. As we go through them, you'll see how their individual backgrounds aren't just footnotes. They powerfully challenge societal norms and reflect God's unconventional yet profoundly gracious methods. First up, we have Tamar, mentioned in Matthew 1.3. Her story is told back in Genesis 38. And her background is, well, to put it mildly, quite complex. She disguised herself as a prostitute to conceive a child by Judah, her father-in-law, after being denied the justice she was due according to custom.
Right, and Judah, not realizing it was her, essentially fulfilled his obligation through this really unconventional encounter. Her bold, almost audacious action actually preserved the messianic line. It's a story of perseverance, maybe even defiance, in the face of profound family dysfunction. But why would Matthew choose to highlight this particular story in a Messiah's genealogy? It seems risky.
Well, it speaks volumes about God's sovereignty, doesn't it? Tamar's morally complicated past and her active, indeed essential, role in ensuring the lineage continued, it powerfully reflects that seed of the woman theme we mentioned. She wasn't an Israelite either, a Canaanite, actually, which subtly introduces the idea of Gentile inclusion right from these very early stages of the lineage. God used a deeply unconventional situation initiated by a woman who was seeking justice to advance his purpose.
Okay, then we move to Rahab, also found in Matthew 1.5. Her story comes from Joshua chapters 2 and 6. Now, her background might be even more surprising to some. She was a Canaanite prostitute in Jericho. Yet she became this pivotal figure by hiding Israelite spies and declaring her faith in Israel's God.
Her story is incredible, really. Rahab, a Gentile and, let's face it, a societal outcast, was not only redeemed by her faith, but was literally grafted into Israel and ultimately into the lineage of Christ. Her audacious act of faith is even celebrated in the New Testament in Hebrews 11 as an example of faith in action. So like Tamar, her non-Israelite status and morally complex past aren't obstacles. They actually underscore God's profound redemptive power. It proves that a person's past, no matter how stained, doesn't disqualify them from his grand design. He chooses unlikely vessels.
Right, vessels the world might discard. And then there's Ruth, again in Matthew 1.5 from the book of Ruth. She was a Moabitess, a widowed foreigner. Her story feels different from the first two, doesn't it? It's one of remarkable faithfulness to her Israelite mother-in-law, Naomi, and a deep embrace of the God of Israel. She married Boaz, the kinsman redeemer, and became the great-grandmother of King David himself.
Ruth's narrative is just beautiful. It's a testament to covenantal loyalty, Hesed love, and God's expansive redemption. Her inclusion as a Gentile widow highlights God's unwavering faithfulness to his promises and his inclusion of foreigners within his plan. While her background wasn't scandalous like Tamar or Rahab, she was still an outsider, a Moabitess, and Moabites were often viewed negatively by Israel due to their history. Yet her presence reinforces the universal scope of the Messiah's lineage. It shows that God's salvation isn't exclusive, it's reaching out.
And then we come to the wife of Uriah, or Bathsheba, mentioned in Matthew 1.6. Her story is in 2 Samuel 11 and 12. Matthew very tactfully refers to her by highlighting the scandalous circumstances rather than using her name directly in that spot.
Right.
She committed adultery with King David, and her husband, Uriah the Hittite, was then murdered by David to cover up the sin. It's a truly dark chapter in David's life.
It is. It's deeply disturbing. And her inclusion, perhaps referenced this way, powerfully highlights human failure at its most devastating. But in stark contrast, it also highlights divine mercy. Because despite the profound sin and brokenness that surrounded their union, God, in his sovereign grace, redeemed those circumstances.
Yeah.
He allowed them to produce Solomon, a key figure in the messianic line from whom Jesus descended.
Wow.
Think about that. Even David's catastrophic sin involving adultery and murder becomes a pivot point in the Messiah's lineage through this woman. It's not just grace, it's God's sheer audacity, really, to repurpose even the messiest parts of human history into his grand design.
Okay, so that's 4. Finally, we arrive at Mary in Matthew 1.16, and of course her story is detailed in Luke chapters 1 and 2. Her background stands in beautiful contrast to the others. A virgin chosen to miraculously bear the Messiah through the Holy Spirit.
Yes, Mary represents the ultimate, the purest fulfillment of that seed of the woman prophecy from Genesis 3.15. Her pure faith and humble obedience, behold, the bondslave of the Lord, may it be done to me according to your word, made her the vessel of the incarnation. Her story, while spotless in terms of personal sin leading to conception, stands in a fascinating tension with the complex backgrounds of the other women.
Right.
Yet all 5 are crucial. Mary's inclusion highlights divine favor and underscores that God chooses his instruments in myriad ways, whether their past is marked by scandal or by purity.
So when we look at these 5 women together, Tamar, Rahab, Ruth, Bathsheba, and Mary, why did Matthew meticulously include them? It's so clear this was intentional, and it just challenges so many assumptions about what a holy lineage should look like. What does this all mean for us, really?
Well, their inclusion synthesizes several overarching themes that are absolutely central to God's redemptive plan. Firstly, it undeniably shatters patriarchal norms. Jewish genealogies were almost exclusively patrilineal, as we've said. Yet here, God, through Matthew's inspired writing, deliberately highlights women, especially women with challenging backgrounds. This aligns perfectly with the seed of the woman prophecy, revealing God's unconventional approach from the very beginning. It's his story, his rules, you could say.
And it absolutely shouts about God's grace working through the margins, doesn't it? These women often represent the marginalized, the flawed, the outcast Gentiles, widows, former prostitutes, those involved in scandalous circumstances. Their presence screams that God's grace operates powerfully through unexpected individuals in surprising situations. They were certainly not seen, perhaps, as the strongest vessels by the world's standards, yet they became these crucial vehicles for God's greatest work.
Precisely. That's a key takeaway. And it also powerfully speaks to the universality of Jesus' mission. The presence of non-Israelite women like Tamar, Rahab, and Ruth doesn't just hint at it, but clearly foreshadows and showcases that God's plan of salvation extends far beyond the Jewish people. It's meant to encompass all nations. The Messiah's lineage explicitly includes Gentile blood, opening the door for everyone you see to belong.
That's such an important point. And perhaps most powerfully, it's about redemption right out of brokenness. The stories of Tamar, Rahab, and Bathsheba involve profound moral complexity and scandal. Their inclusion demonstrates God's incredible power to redeem and transform that brokenness, even sin itself, into instruments for his purpose. God doesn't just forgive past mistakes. He can somehow weave even the messiest parts of human history, individual sin, into his grand design. It all points to a masterful divine orchestration.
Absolutely. The Messianic line was preserved through remarkable, sometimes shocking, divine intervention, even when human paths were broken or highly unconventional. It clearly demonstrates God's absolute sovereignty over every circumstance, even human failure and sin. It's a reminder that God's plans are often much bigger, much more resilient than our perceived limitations or failures.
It truly is. This reinforces the idea that Jesus' human ancestry was just full of grace, mercy, and this divine orchestration. It directly challenges any notion that a perfect or pristine lineage was required for the Messiah. You might think your past, your status, your gender, or your background could exclude you from being part of something significant for God. But these women just prove the opposite. Their non-pristine lives, their complicated pasts were not roadblocks. Instead, they became platforms through which divine grace shone most brightly. It's a profound encouragement for everyone, male and female, to see that God deliberately chooses to use what the world might call weak vessels to bring about his greatest triumph over evil.
That's perfectly put. These women, flawed, faithful, and often from foreign origins, powerfully remind us that God works through the unexpected. He works through those whom society might overlook or disqualify. Their stories affirm that the Messiah came from precisely such a lineage, a savior for all people, regardless of background or past.
So what's really fascinating here is how these stories truly challenge you to reconsider assumptions about who God chooses to use in his unfolding plan. They dismantle the idea that you need a perfect resume or an untarnished past to be part of something eternally significant. These women, in all of their complexity, became crucial vehicles for the ultimate Redeemer, Jesus Christ.
And this raises, I think, an important question for you, the listener, to consider. If God can weave individuals with such complex and unconventional lives into the central story of salvation, the story culminating in Jesus Christ who defeats evil, what does that imply about the boundless scope of his grace and his redemptive work in every